I'm very glad because today the topic that we are going to discuss is so relevant and timely. It's dissent in a healthy democracy. Whether it's India or whether it's other parts of the world, whether it's the United States or whether it's even Hungary, whether it's other parts of Europe or whether it's the UK or whether it's the Philippines or whether it's Malaysia, we suffer now from a malaise that's kind of spread internationally. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the malaise is and what possibly we could do about the malaise. And the most horrific thing for someone like me is the fact that all these governments are coming heavily down on the people on the right to freedom of expression expressed as dissent. So in all ways, in many ways, whether we are in India or elsewhere, we are suffering the wrath of the state in what is ostensibly a democratic state, which has been ostensibly elected by us, people whom we have sent to power to rule for us and with us, who suddenly turn the situation around and become oppressors. I don't have to labor that, but I'm going to kind of build an argument today about what is and what can be or what has been. All of them come together, and let's see how we take it from here. I was a student of English literature, and one of my favorite poets was William Butler Yeats, but I met an Irishman in Heidelberg who told me that he was a bit of a fascist, which came to me as a terrible shock. But nevertheless, I have a poem of Yeats which I've been reading, and I'm sure all of you know it, but I think it's relevant today, so I'm going to begin with a small quotation, because we also believe in the MKSS that these lines that we draw and the categories we make are only useful in so far as we use it for analysis. But at the cutting edge where Shankar, Nikhil and I live, categories don't exist. People are people, and there's a homogeneity about the way we live, and we don't suddenly become activists and then become mothers and then become cooks and then become, whatever. We are all of that together, and it might be in the middle of cooking your evening meal that you talk the most intense politics. So it's not divided by classroom and not classroom or leisure and work. We live a different kind of life. So for me, poetry is part of politics, and politics could be part of poetry. So this famous poem of his, which is The Second Coming, which many of you may have read, but I find that the younger generation doesn't read so many of the things that I used to read, so maybe it will come as a new poem you haven't heard. So Yeats wrote this poem with a kind of despair. So let me read it to you. He said, "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity." These last two lines describe our political universe so well, because the good are quiet, or they lack the courage to speak, and the worst is really full of passionate intensity and tries to convince you that white is black and black is white. But after this, he says, surely some revelation is at hand. Now, even Yeats, when he wrote the first stanza, could not end there. He wanted to see what hope there was in future, or will it be a situation which will never end? It's important because I think hope is what keeps us all going, keeps activists going, keeps politicians going, keeps researchers going, keeps every one of us going, and the end of life is the end of hope. And I remember Isabel Allende had written a beautiful book in which she described a family which just went around selling hope. How valuable a commodity it is today to have just hope. Or whether it's Marquez who talks about magical realism, we all need to believe in some illusions or some delusions. The delusions are terrible, the illusions probably are better. But we all believe in them to take us further and help us survive with energy. I remember some years ago, dissent was only an issue for academic debate. And it was a hugely discussed value and a position and a need for people who were at the margins of the margins. And the public debate, say 10 years ago in India, what was it? If you looked at the papers, it was full of discussions on the works program, huge, furious arguments as to whether the works program would pitch India into the next decade of development or whether it would take us down. They were the people like us who talked about the need for the poor, were called Jholawalas. Jhola is a cloth bag which we hang on our shoulders, which every activist in India carries. So we were derogatorily called Jholawalas, and the so-called pseudo-economists, because I call them pseudo-economists, people who don't really study economics but who think they are economists, were at us. The right wing was dead against us, but for 4 years, the public discourse in India, in the papers, most importantly was about the poor. It was about poverty, how to deal with poverty, and how work was such a consistent and important part of dealing with the poverty debate. They were angry that we had got so much space. There was a right to information which talked about governance, which talked about how poor people needed to know what was in the annals of the mysterious papers that were filed away in government. We wanted to know what was inside, and nobody could believe that very poor people in a poor country could really see through this mess and sharply focus on this extraordinary need. In this, they were a little more moderate, because to say that they didn't want transparency would have reflected very badly on people. But they brought in an argument which was incipient then, but which has become a crescendo now, that there's a policy paralysis because of too much information, and people don't take decisions in government because they're tortured by this act which forces them to go out with their information. But these were the popular debates at that time. We discussed equality and justice, and at that time 7 or 8 very important rights-based legislations were passed, empowering the disadvantaged to get what should have come normally to them, but which wasn't coming normally, which they had to go through a process of exercising it as a constitutional right to fight for it. There was the Forest Rights Act, there was the Domestic Violence Act, there was the right to education, there was the right to food, things that should have naturally flowed when we became independent. But now, in an ultimate irony, we use Mahatma Gandhi as a symbolic shield to destroy all his values. We use every single possible symbol in India today to destroy the value that lies behind that symbol. In fact, all the buzz words that were there, like disclosure and public audits, like opening up policies, like talking about legislation being the right of every person who could interact with the government to decide what was priority and not priority, because these acts had shown, the Right to Information Act, which is now used by between 6 and 8 million users a year. The Right to Information Act is used by them. And so far as the work rights law, the MGNREG is concerned, 100 million workers work every year, households. Huge figures. So the criticism, even from the present Prime Minister, he said he'll hold up these as institutions of failure of the previous government, didn't quite work. But what has happened is that the process through which these acts came into place, which was debate, discussion, critique, protests, demanding platforms to dialogue with the government, saying what they thought was right in the public domain, have all become difficult. We are all under scrutiny. Many of our phones are tapped. Most probably all our phones are tapped. We don't have access to public space now for protests. We can't protest. In fact, I was quite appreciative of the fact that you could go. I was in that march that walked with a few friends. We walked to Parliament. In India, you can't walk to Parliament. You're stopped miles away. And we are all in one street in Delhi, and if you ever go, it should be a tourist attraction. You should go and see how protests, where protests have landed in India. It's like a fish market. There are about 40 loudspeakers, and Indians like it really loud. So we have 40 loudspeakers, each drowning the other, and nobody can hear what's being said. And now increasingly government feels that we should be really pushed to the corners of the city and probably not be seen and of course not heard. So in this, the whole dream of the political system which we adopted, which we call democracy, of liberty, equality and fraternity, now have become impossible dreams. So to fight for them today, we look at dissent in the context of our societies and our governments and the way they function today. Because unfortunately or fortunately, the Indian people took this promise quite seriously. We really thought that the Indian Constitution had promised us these things, and no matter whether the government delivered or didn't deliver it, at least we had the right to speak. And the government has honed in on the right to freedom of expression as the critical point at which it will hold us, pin us down and reduce us to inanimate beings. And in that, dissent is impossible today. Any kind of dissent has serious repercussions. In this whole arena, the universities of India used to be pools of debates, place for debate, for disagreement, for expressing opinions, and I say it because I am in the CU today particularly, and we had Rohit Vemula from the University of Hyderabad committing suicide because he expressed a political opinion about the right wing and said that the Muslim minority was being persecuted by the right-wing politics. He also raised some fundamental questions about the nature of death sentences given to so-called terrorists, and he raised some questions about democracy and poverty, and his PhD fellowship was cancelled. He came from a Dalit family and his entire family depended on that, and he left a beautiful letter. I think it's a letter which really brought tears to all our eyes. It's a wonderful letter, and he committed suicide. And then Hyderabad University became like a war zone. People's mobiles were taken away, all internet facilities were suspended, food was not cooked, and when students said, look, we'll cook food, they were also arrested and they were in jail. So this happened in Hyderabad, and the government that's there today got a lot of flack. Then of course we had the case of Kanhaiya and his friends, who in a meeting in the Jawaharlal Nehru University talked about some rights of the Kashmiris, and Kashmir is of course a very sensitive issue in India, and they just raised a slogan. The slogan shouting doesn't mean sedition, but they were put in jail for sedition. And I think in the context of all this, where tribals who question mining are called Maoists, students who question democracy and democratic principles are called terrorists. So it's really a difficult place for India today, and therefore dissent has now become very difficult. The moment dissent becomes difficult, I would say the democracy is sick. It's an unhealthy place. It doesn't want to listen to voices of people who are non-violent, or not raising arms, who want to say something about what they perceive is wrong with their own societies. The marginalized have always lived in the hemisphere of public action, defined by their expressions, because they don't have any other place. So it's the street where they come and express themselves. The marginalized cannot go to parliament, cannot go to seminar rooms, are not allowed in the portals where the high and mighty sit. So the streets have been our home. We've gone, and in public protest we've expressed many things, and it is through a series of such public protests that the right to information law was born, that the right to employment guarantee was born, that the right to food was defined, and so many other laws we've got, including other later laws, have all been on the streets. Even the physically challenged, they got together on their wheelchairs, went into forbidden areas, they went in. There's a section 144 of the Indian Penal Code. If the government puts the code, applies the code on a geographic area, you can't enter, and if you enter you're arrested. But they just went, and the police couldn't do anything to people who were already physically challenged, and they just went and made a demand. So I'm just saying that everybody in India likes street action, because that's our parliament, that's our assembly, and that's where we express our points of view. And when government systematically denies us that space, then it ceases to be a government that listens to dissent, a government that looks at differences of opinion. We know that people have always protected these values. These values have never been protected by governments. In the Stray case, there may have been one great leader who spoke up for liberty, equality, and fraternity, or spoke up for all the various values that we cherish. But it's mainly the people who fought for it. And the French Revolution, of course, gave us those three magic words: liberty, equality, and fraternity. And when the framers of the Indian Constitution made our Indian Constitution, framed it, we decided that those three values would be primary to our Constitution. It's in the preamble to the Indian Constitution. The Indian Constitution was chaired by a Dalit. Dalit, for those who don't know, are the untouchables of India. And we still have untouchability in India. We still practice untouchability in India. We still kill our untouchables. So if anyone says that untouchability doesn't exist in India, it's a myth. Maybe it's got slightly less than before, but it's because this constitution was chaired by a Dalit intellectual, a brilliant man called B.R. Ambedkar. And though 85% of the Constituent Assembly was Hindu, they decided that India would not be a theocratic state, it would be a secular democratic republic. And because of that decision, Dalits have owned, and many others have owned the Constitution, because it's everybody's Constitution. It's a Constitution for every Indian citizen. And we've gone on to many other things because B.R. Ambedkar realized that to defend something, you have to first own it. So in the emergence of this new leadership that is appearing today, they are leading up and building a new argument, saying that the Constitution is passé, that actually everybody's got their rights. Now, why do you need a Constitution? The Constitution was framed many years ago. It's old, we need change. And we all get involved with this process of change, and we coin phrases like post-truth. How can truth ever be passé? How can you have a post-truth generation? You can have a post-ideology generation, but you can't have a post-principle generation. Truth is a principle. It is not something linked to a specific ideology. And if there's no truth, what else is there in our world? And are we willing to live with falsities and lies? So how do we define, and how do we so glibly become part of the debate in which we talk of post-truth? So, but now, this new emerging leadership looks at the rights-based laws in India and ridicules it. And it must be sure the same everywhere in the world. I can only speak with my detailed experience of India. And they use all kinds of ways to make the constitutional rights appear silly. But one of the main things that they've started doing is that if anyone speaks up for fundamental rights, for constitutional rights or democratic rights, the government doesn't come up face to restrict you. They have wings of their political party which do social policing, which come and threaten you. So if a girl posts a Facebook post which they do not like, she's threatened so much that she has to withdraw the post and she has to go into seclusion. If you have two young women saying in Bombay, why should a political leader be so important that the death of that political leader should jam the roads of Bombay for so many days? Cases were filed against them in the police station. Muslims who are innocent because they are meat eaters are accused of being killers of cows. There's no proof, yet you arrest them. Dalits, because they flay dead animals, and because now the cow has suddenly become a holy cow, holier than any cow, any animal in the world. You take those Dalits, first you put them into a position where you say you have to flay the cows, the dead animals, because no one will do that dirty job. Then when they flay the cows, you catch hold of them, and this is in the state of Gujarat, which is our Prime Minister's state, and you hang them on trees and you beat them till they are almost dead. Now this is the way we repress freedom of expression, the right to justice, the right to any kind of debate, reasoned debate. And the biggest victim is rationality, reason. It's the it's the constitutional rights, it's the validity of the law, it's the rule of law itself. But the words that have been taken away from us brings in a purely another kind of a debate on the semantics and idiom today of this new kind of politics that's emerging, which disallows dissent, which disallows any differences, and they take all our words and they turn them, they invert them. In a college in Delhi, in Ramjas College, because they had a certain political point of view in a meeting, right-wing students' unions went there and beat up the masters. The teacher, one of the lecturers, was in hospital with a couple of broken ribs. And next day on their Facebook page, they said they don't have the freedom of expression. That was a hell of a thing. First, you deny people the right to freedom of expression, and then you go and say that you've been denied the freedom of expression. So every single term we use has been co-opted. So we really have to think of every single word today. We have to think of what it evokes. So we are really caught in traps. For instance, Indian social activists used to say, oh, nothing has happened in so many years. We didn't really mean that. What we meant was that inequality is still there. But you know how when you stand up on the podium, get punch drunk with your language and you say what you want, that phrase has been picked up and the present government says, nothing has happened in the last 60, 70 years. For heaven's sake, how has India grown? Not in 3 years. India has grown because of systematic growth of all kinds of things in the last so many years. You can expunge textbooks, you can remove leaders, you can say that, you can tell many lies, and lies have begun. And these lies are filling our textbooks now. So it's really a huge problem. Now, as I speak to you, India wants to have one single narrative. How can you have a single narrative? And if you disagree with a single narrative, you are against the state. So that single narrative is dominating us, whatever that single narrative may be, and there's an illusion that controls only exist in totalitarian states which are communist. So I tell you that totalitarian states can be right, they can be center, they can be left. It's a system of governance in which it's not the ideology you follow, but a system of governance you follow. So we are increasingly getting a totalitarian state in my country, which is right-wing, which is not communist. But it's laying down the diktat of what can be said, what food can be eaten. You can't eat beef, you can't eat that. What clothing is allowed, what choice of what public statement you can make, or what you can worship. The list is endless. So for me, as an Indian, dissent is critical to my life as a reasonable human being. As a person who works for social justice and equality, it's important for me to know what is right and what is wrong, and I must have the freedom to speak. I come from the south of India, from a state called Tamil Nadu, and we had a great poet called Subramanya Bharati. And he composed this poem in the 1930s when we were fighting the British and we were against colonial India. And he said, this woman says, I'm dying of hunger and I need a bowl of gruel. But more important than my getting that bowl of gruel is the need to say that I need a bowl of gruel. Because if I don't say that I need a bowl of gruel, I'm not going to get it. So the right to freedom of expression, the right to state what your condition is critically important. The rhetoric of nationalism, of sedition, has really reduced space in my country. And the most frightening thing is that the statutes are not being changed, but you edge the populism to the point at which discrimination, violence, intolerance become the norm of the day. And it's frightening when people don't express their opinion and they are quiet because of fear. India has a multi-layered society, as we all know. It's many religions. Those of us who do not know, we have Hindus, Muslims, Christians. We have Sikhs, we have Jains, we have Buddhists, and we even have a few Jews. So it's a very complex society. And then the entire South Asia, not only India, is divided by caste. So we have the caste layers: Christian, you still have caste; Muslim, you still have caste. You are a Buddhist, perhaps you have caste. Jains, of course you have caste. Hindus, of course you have caste. Sikhs have caste. So the caste system has permeated the entire machinery of all religions, all living relationships in societies, and in this complex state, to say you will have only one narrative, you'll have one interpretation of what society should be, and that not necessarily based on equality or justice, is completely terrifying. In older times, we survived. We had these narratives, multiple narratives. For instance, when I went to Rajasthan 40 years ago, we had narratives, we had stories, we had different gods, we had different stories of our heroes, we had different stories about our own histories, and we all identified with them. Today, because the media has been completely subjugated, because the media has taken over, because there is this electronic media and perhaps digitization that we'll talk about tomorrow, everything is more uniform and standardized, and you sell the single narrative. And if you do not believe that single narrative, from buying your soap and your shampoo and we have a cream called Fair and Lovely. We are obsessed with color in India. So you have to be fair and lovely, and we have even handsome, fair and handsome. Why the hell should we be fair? When I was young, we said black is beautiful. We didn't say fair is lovely. But everything has been inverted, and so whether it's fair and lovely, or whether it's the jingle on the television, which tells you that everyone in India must be a Hindu, or must say Jai Siya Ram. I went to Heidelberg, and I crossed the bridge, and there was a Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, or somebody or the other sitting there and singing. And because Shankar and I felt that we should also be generous, we gave him 50 cents of a euro. And that man said to me, Jai Siya Ram. Now, Jai Siya Ram in India today is a completely communal greeting. We won't say Jai Siya Ram, because Jai Siya Ram means it's been loaded. It never was, but today it's a loaded greeting, because behind that is communal India. So, because they said to Muslims, you say Jai Siya Ram or you go to Pakistan. You say Jai Siya Ram or you go into your grave. These were the slogans. So, for those of us who've heard those slogans, Jai Siya Ram ceases to be religious. It's discriminatory and awful. So, you know that academia, as much as other institutions, is pulled into all this. And I'm really very glad that perhaps in the second coming of looking at hope, you, amongst other things, have invited me to come here and perhaps to speak about some things that happen that are good and well, and maybe also speak about issues that really trouble people at the cutting edge. But for me, it's been very good to see that many places in the world today, you're looking at action as part of theory, because if theory and action do not merge, and if action doesn't inform theory about what is relevant, you can research, but you will be like, I'm sorry again, I go back to my literature, you go like this journey to Laputa of Gulliver. When he went to Laputa, he found that there were these scientists who were extracting sunbeams out of cucumbers. So, and since they looked at the sun all the time, all their eyes had gone up. So their physiognomy had changed. So if we research without purpose, I don't know where it goes. So research and knowledge has to be purposeful, has to be placed in a context of an ideological position. It has to have some principles. It has to have belief and truth, and it has to carry on from there. And it's also a message to all of us, academia, activists, people, that it's a cyclical process. You have to periodically be activated to support your democracy. You have to interact with critical issues, with uncomfortable issues, be in uncomfortable positions, be in a strong minority, express dissent, because these are all dissenting voices. You express dissent so that it's only through that you can bring the ruling elite into some semblance of their irregularities, understanding their illogic, understanding their mistakes. Okay, so I'm going to begin with a little bit of Ambedkar, and then I'm going to show you two small clips. So you can't really think that Aruna is just gassing, and Shankar is here, and Shankar and I and Soumya are going to sing in the end. But for now, I want to go back to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And I'm going to read a little bit of what he said. He said this on the day that he gave us the Constitution and he gave us the right to vote. And he said, on the 26th of January 1950, we're going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we'll have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structures, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. It's almost like an astrological prediction. We must remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from inequality will blow up the structure of political democracy, which this assembly has so laboriously built up. And what we see today is an implosion of all those values, but it is a very calculated, premeditated, worked on issue. It's not been spontaneous, and I think a lot of forces in society have been working to keep the facade of democracy, because people will get beguiled by it, and in the real essence you will not have democracy. And we have a new word for it. We call it majoritarianism in India, where the majority, you get the vote of the majority, you get a lot of people to vote for you, whether it's Trump or others, and then you use that majority to actually disempower those people. But your bombast and your rhetoric and your delivery are always separated by two universes, not even by a big difference. So people believe that you're going to deliver because your rhetoric is such, but in actual fact you're denied it. The struggle for equality and justice led us to the National Campaign for People's Right to Information, which dealt with governance and access, and dealt with the decentralization of power through access to decision making, and the MG-NREGA workers' rights campaigns for the right to work, in which every rural household in India is guaranteed 100 days work, and the denial of that work is justiciable. If you deny that work, they can get compensation, and the compensation is, Soumya is working with this, and she can say when she comes and sings, and when if you ask any questions about how effective it has been to empower poor households to get that minimum amount of work to preserve their dignity, stop migrating, possibly send their children to school, and so on. So with the RTI with 6 to 8 million workers, and the MG-NREGA with 100 million workers who get guaranteed employment, we have really established the point that participatory democracy can work. It doesn't have to be hooliganism. It doesn't have to be without values and principles. It is not something which doesn't deal with mechanisms. You deal with mechanisms, you deal with governance, you deal with structures, you deal with everything. But it's possible. And that's why I think the biggest fear of the incipient fascist or dictator is the rights-based legislation, because it's a living proof that people can make democracy work, and that it's through that kind of democracy alone that democracy will really have a future in the world. I'm going to talk about Mohanji, who was one of our Dalit comrades who passed away a little while ago. It was a moment of epiphany for him when he said, if you don't get those records out of the government offices, we are finished. He said, I didn't say that. It was Mohanji who said it when we were sitting outside our mud house and we were talking about what we could do, and he said those records are critical to our livelihood, our lives. He said in his song, he sang a song, and he said, the dacoits of yore used to use guns. The dacoit of today uses a pen to kill us. So it's the government of thieves. In Hindi, of course, it sounds beautiful. And it was sung and it became viral. It became more powerful a method of communication of the idea of transparency and accountability than any speech we could have given. Now there's some slogans I'm going to tell. I don't know if you can all shout with me, but maybe it will be a good idea. The first slogan is Hamara Paisa, Hamara Hisab. The first slogan was our money, our accounts. This translation of governance and financial accountability into these 4 words was the gift of ordinary women, not of me, not of Nikhil, not of Shankar. It was ordinary women sitting and agitating and were asked by people in Delhi, why if you come here and what do you know about the right to information? That Sushila said, when I send my son to the marketplace with 10 rupees and he comes back, I ask for accounts. This country spends billions of rupees in my name. The government spends billions of rupees in my name. Shouldn't I ask for accounts? So she said in our language, our money, our accounts. It also was something which became viral. It was translated in, we have 17 major Indian languages. We have many dialects. So it was translated into every language and it became very, very powerful. Now I am going to show you a small clip of a film.
इसका इलाज ये कि भ्रष्टाचार मिटना चाहिए। अब हम आपको खोल के बताएं तो ऐसे भ्रष्ट अफसरों को डिसमिस किया जाए, यहाँ पेंशन घर दे दिया जाए और उनका जो रोड राज है वो सारा नष्ट कर दिया जाए तो भ्रष्टाचार मिट जाएंगे।
So this is an analysis by an ordinary human being who probably earns less than 50 euros, no, much less. 40 euros and he earned less than 40 euros a month, who probably was educated in a formal sense only up to the 6th class, but he 2 euros a day. So on that meager earning and with that absolute level of understanding, he says this. What is lacking in our entire system today is the equality of human beings and knowledge. We think knowledge is contained in a very prefixed definition of reading, writing, which is a skill, and of using computers, which is another set of skills, or of being able to use jargon, which is a third set of skills, and being able to analyze, sorry, Anand, big data. But when you really come up with the details, there's no one like them. They can tell you how many bags of cement came, how much went to the corrupt man, which the BDO took, which the chief chap in the village kept, and how do they do it? They have their excellent systems. They count the bags of cement because they use them. They reuse all those bags of cement for n number of things. So they count the bags, they sit there and they watch the carts or the trucks or the trolleys, of tractors and trolleys coming to dump material, and they are interested because the wage is of importance to them. The infrastructure is also important to them. Who will have better data than they? So it has to be in a form in which they can both contribute and use that data. So the whole campaign of the right to information was built on hundreds and thousands of such people giving us information which then the political bosses simply could not deny. And the bureaucrats also, who don't like the act, had to accept as correct. Because they used to say, your information is wrong. We went with a question, they would say you're a Maoist. They would say you're a terrorist, you're a disruptor of business. Why have you come here with these questions? But when you go with the facts, there's no way they can say that to you. So what we understood through these hundreds of stories, and in the entire legal process, when we fashioned the law, that we went to government with these facts and they just couldn't say anything to us. So the importance of the details, and the British said when they left us that the devil lies in the details. We never understood what it meant till we actually went into this campaign. And every detail is critical to proving the necessity for a right, the necessity for survival and livelihood, of the dignity of a human being. So I think one important thing that is, I think, relevant for a university like CEU is to understand that we have tremendous knowledge inequality, we have skill inequality, and we don't really listen to knowledge when it comes to us because it's not framed in the way we want it to be framed. We don't have the patience to sit and listen to them the way they'd like to tell us things, but we have gems of political wisdom in what they think and what they understand and what they tell us. And I think this is where the whole people's movement in India has played a very critical role, because we've lived with people, we have understood them, we have also had moments of impatience, we've had irritation, we've had quarrels. I mean, it's no ideal relationship where you don't quarrel, but where there has been, in our minds, no dismissal of dissent or disagreement. We know that if we dismiss dissent and disagreement, we ourselves are finished. So for ourselves and our own knowledge base, knowledge building, understanding of life, understanding of governance, we need to listen to people with whom we don't agree. And many a time we have had to agree to disagree. Very often we've had to say, you know more than I do, we'll do it your way. So I think I wanted to bring that to you. Now I want to tell you, he said, if I don't agree with you, someone will just finish me off. So the second slogan I'm going to talk about is the right to know, the right to live. Sometimes in India, as everywhere else in the world, the right to know is linked to the right to survival. Whether you are in a contentious area, even when you are in an economically suppressed area, and in most of South Asia and West Asia and Southeast Asia, the right to know is linked to the right to live. And I speak, I think, with a fair degree of understanding that it's linked to survival for us. So let us see another small clip.
Breaking news coming in. Crackdown on the anti-nuclear protesters at Kulam in Tamil Nadu. Police have moved in to remove the protesters at Kulam. Tear gas shells have been used.
200 anti-nuclear activists have been detained in Tuticorin, who were heading to join protesting villagers in Kakarai.
An early morning clampdown on the media. Journalists and the OB vans restricted from entering the ground zero of the anti-nuclear protests in the Kakarai.
SP Uday Kumar, the face of the anti-nuclear campaign at Kulam, now slapped with charges of sedition and waging war against the country.
Take a relook at the country's now updated sedition laws.
Charged with sedition. Charges of sedition.
In the case of sedition.
Sedition. Sedition. Sedition.
This short clip brings to you many issues. I'm going to leave it to you. I'm not going to discuss everything, but certainly people on the eastern coast of India who gave the land for the nuclear plant quite happily many years ago, when they saw what happened in Fukushima, they did not want that nuclear plant to come up. Each one of these women, the first woman is called Xavier Amma, who spoke. She knows more about radiation and more about atomic issues than I know. And she says, what guarantee? If the state doesn't have a right to take away our lives with wrong decisions. After they saw Fukushima, they said, we don't want it because they are a tsunami-affected coastline. They live in tsunami-affected, rebuilt houses. So they said, if you now have this nuclear plant, and now we know all about radiation, they are fisher folk. You will kill the fish. What are we going to fish? How are we going to survive? When they asked these questions, 6,000 people had cases of sedition against them. Uday Kumar was a scientist in the US who left the US, went back to his village to start working with people on a range of environmental issues. This is about 5 years ago, this film. It's not today. Today, I don't know whether NDTV will actually even show us the clip, or whether CNN IBN will show us the clip. This is an older recording, but I still brought it. It shows today what the media is like, what the right to freedom of expression of the media is like. They are threatened today. And most of the television companies are owned by huge companies in India. Last, there's a slogan we used to shout, and it's a very important slogan for us. We used to say, this country is ours, it's yours and mine, and it's not the feudal property of a small group of people. And today we expand it to say, this world is yours and mine, it's not the feudal property of a small group of people. Of course, in Hindi it sounds very powerful. In translation it loses its power. And then, but that slogan made us go and ask lots of people, what do you think should be the accountability systems of India? And I remember when we were debating the Ombudsman bill, the Lokpal bill, and we came up, we had a very different position to the mainstream demand. And we argued at that time, there was still space to argue out your case in public. And I remember going, all of us in the MKSS going to Bhilwara, a district very close to us, to talk to Dalit youth on something. And I think Nikhil asked them, what is your conception of an accountability law? And they said 5 things. They said information, jankari. They said bhagidari, which means participation. They said karwai, which means implementation. Then they said jankari, sunvai. Then they said a hearing. We want a hearing in which we are heard. And the last one they said was suraksha, which is security. But we have added a 6th one to it.
So the democratic platform.
We need a democratic platform to engage with people. If we don't, then we are dead. And so if this can come from a group of young Dalit boys who weren't prepared to discuss policy, we know what our loss is when we don't discuss things with people. So the only way forward, we feel, is participatory democracy. What have been the various engagements with governance? Because I don't have too much time, I'm going to quickly run through some of the important things that have happened. Engagement with governance has come by defining principles at the grassroots, not talking from parliament down, but talking about principles from people up. So you talk to people, you find out what they believe in, and since there's so much wisdom, largely, I'm not saying everybody is wise, there are groups of people at the grassroots who are bigoted, narrow, parochial, limited. I'm not saying they're wonderful, I'm not painting them in romantic colors, but there are sufficient numbers of people with extraordinary common sense. And they know what they're talking about. But also with consulting, once you have talked to the grassroots, at the cutting edge, you know what the principles are. Going on a long journey with specialized groups, talking to professional groups, talking to lawyers, talking to drafters of the law, talking to parliamentarians, talking to civil servants, engaging with political parties, the whole lot, because we are not divided by categories and no one category is good and one category bad. Going to all the universities, we got great support from the university lecturers and from the university vice chancellors. We got spaces in the universities. One of our big conventions was held in the Delhi University, where the convocation hall was given to us for our meeting. So it was not as if people didn't participate. Every kind of person got involved. Then in the legislating process, we had 10 states in India involved in the process, with their bureaucracies and their political parties. They made bad laws, they were critiqued, they went back to the drafting table, they came back with better laws. Then the union law was so bad, we asked for a redraft of the union law. Then meanwhile, there was a somewhat more democratic government that came, which gave us space. So some of us got into positions of an advisory nature, in which we talked about the law, and we got laws made on a spate of social rights. I said it before, but I'll say it again. So what were these? On economic equality, we worked on questions of work, livelihood and wages. On legislating, on auditing and accountability, we brought in concepts of social accountability. Not only the financial accountability, but people being able to audit their works, the money, this whole concept of our money, our accounts. So people can see information and say whether actually that is there or not. I can't go into too much detail, but I must tell you that we have come up with extraordinarily funny situations, tragic situations. We don't know whether they are tragic or funny. 3 different departments booking the same check dam. 3 of them taking you through 3 different routes to the same check dam. You have ghost works, works that never happened, being on bill, dead people's names on muster rolls. But today we have government striking off 300,000 people's names from the pension list, and it's doing its own ghost-like activity now. Because they struck off these 300,000 names on the pension list, and we went back to our village and we found actually out of 40 people declared dead, 29 were alive. But because they were struck off as dead, they had no access to pensions, no access to food, no access to anything, because that number was their only link to a government program. So we have now things happening quite absolutely on the same principle of madness on this side. We had justice and social exclusion looked at. So we had women, lots of women's groups in India, as you know, those of you who've been to India, and we also fall apart very often. We don't agree, but we came together and we got some laws passed. The indigenous people suffering from land, whose land and forest rights were guaranteed, but who suffer from mining industries, they were able to make their voice heard, and we have 2 great victories in the state of Odisha, when a Korean multinational called POSCO and an Indian multinational called Vedanta have been removed from operating in the lands of the tribals. It's a huge victory, but it's a democratic battle. They are not Maoists. They fought a democratic battle and stuck it out day after day after day. I was going to show you a small clip, but I thought it would be too much. So those who are interested can take it from me. So then the Dalits, the minorities, the caste taboos, they are not being allowed to worship. First you say that they are Hindus, then you don't allow them into the temple. For heaven's sake, if they are Hindus, they should be allowed into the temple. They have separate water pots, they can't sit on the same level, they can't sit with other children. It's dismal. Just 2 years ago, literate Dalits who own land in the district of Nagaur in Rajasthan went to harvest their crop, and they were run over and killed by a tractor by the middle level caste. 5 of them died on the spot, the 6 died in the hospital. The government is still to take action against them. The government is still to take action against the man who beat up Shankar when we went on a big tour of Rajasthan, just talking about the rights-based laws. He just came, and Shankar was singing a song. We're going to sing a song so you know how powerful he is. Talks beautifully, thinks beautifully. He came and attacked him, and he was a member of the Legislative Assembly, he was an elected member of the Assembly. He hit Shankar so badly, his nerves are damaged in one arm today, and he can't lift even small weights with his arm. that fellow is still to be booked. We have Pelu Khan, a Muslim dairy farmer, was going from Rajasthan to Haryana with milch cattle. On the national highway between Delhi and Jaipur, they were stopped and they were attacked by so-called cow vigilantes, beaten within inches of their life. Pelu Khan survived for 3 days. He was beaten on the 1st of April, he died on the 4th of April, and with a dying declaration telling you exactly who killed him, arrests have not been made. So when you look at social justice today in India, you really have serious questions. The rule of law demands that at least when there is beating and murder, which are stark violent activities in which video recordings exist. Of Shankar's beating, we have video recordings. Of Pelu Khan's murder, there have been video recordings. And yet the government doesn't arrest people. So what kind of a government, who can talk of good governance if the minimal demands of the implementation of the rule of law are not met? Then we've looked at participation and accountability, and I've already told you about the Bhilwara principles, but we've talked about many other things, and all this has happened because we listened to people, because we went and sat with them and we learned that we have something and they have something. We, in that sense, meaning those who are literate and have Western liberal education, have been to, we know about Aristotle, and we also know about Marx, and we also know about Gandhi, and we also know about Schumacher and many other people. I mean, a huge list. We know all of them. We've read Bertrand Russell, we know this one, we read Chomsky, okay. They don't read Chomsky, they don't even know Gandhi's books. They know Gandhi as a man who got them independence. But their understanding and their wisdom is no less than ours. They have a different kind of understanding, a different way of relating to life, and perhaps in many ways sounder than ours, because it's a day-to-day battle for them to fight for their right to freedom of expression, to establish that their dissent or protest is not dissent, but the demand for decency, dignity, and a livelihood. So today, I feel that by hitting at the right to freedom of expression and dissent, in Hungary, I think the people at the bottom of the pile will really suffer the most. They won't even be allowed to articulate, they won't have space for articulation, and if they speak, they will lose everything. So if you are going to lose everything, if you have very small amount, say $2 a day in India, if you're going to lose that, how do you survive? So you opt not to speak. So this is coercion and fear, simply not part of my democratic dream. So dissent has to be fought against, and we have to speak. I think all of us, as you have marvelously done by walking, I've walked with you a couple of times and I know you walk, but it has to be a little more than that. It has to be framing of positions, and it's got to be continual, it has got to be constant, it has to have a curve that goes, and you cannot have the single narrative take over our lives. Thank you very much, and we are going to sing a song. So Soumya and Shankar will come, and this song sort of kinds of sums it up.
20 साल पहले ये गीत जो लोग आरटीआई आंदोलन में लड़ रहे थे, उनके मन की एक भावना थी, वो मन में क्या सोच रहे थे कि क्या सरकार से ऐसा मांगा जो सरकार देने के लिए तैयार नहीं है, वो गीत हम गा रहे हैं जो आंदोलन.
We are going to sing a song, says Shankar. The lyric was created 20 years ago on what do we really want, and what is this great thing that the government cannot give us. So it was a song asking for and placing the demands of people in front of the state.
आप इस गाने में साथ अगर देंगे तो आपको बोलना है मैं नहीं मांगा, अगर उसको आप उस तरह से बोलेंगे.
This is a participatory song. The rest of it you can't say because it's in Hindi, but one word you will be able to say, 3 words. मैं नहीं मांगा. Will you be able to say that?
मैं नहीं मांगा.
मैं नहीं मांगा.
अरे सोना चांदी
मैं नहीं मांगा.
एक मिनट. मैं
means I don't want.
Do not want.
I don't want it, simply.
अरे सोना चांदी
मैं नहीं मांगा,
मैं लमाड़िया
मैं नहीं मांगा,
मोटो बंगलो
मैं नहीं मांगा,
बंगला में गाड़ी
मैं नहीं मांगा,
गाड़ी में कुत्तो
मैं नहीं मांगा,
कुत्ता के पट्टो
मैं नहीं मांगा,
अरे मोटो बंगलो
मैं नहीं मांगा,
बंगला में बरामदो
मैं नहीं मांगा,
बरामदा में गमलो
मैं नहीं मांगा,
गमला में बेलड़ी
मैं नहीं मांगा,
मारुति गाड़ी
मैं नहीं मांगा,
टेसा कार
मैं नहीं मांगा,
अरे हीरो होंडा
मैं नहीं मांगा,
अरे टीवी कूलर
मैं नहीं मांगा।
दिमाग खराब है क्या?
अरे यार तुम गरीब हैं और क्या बोलता है, थोड़ा उनसे बात कर लो।
ट्रांसलेट तो कर लें।
Yes, I'll translate. That's why. The whole stanza of this, the verse says, we don't want a big bungalow. We don't want a big bungalow with a big veranda. We don't want a big veranda with creepers. We don't want a car. We don't want a pup in a car. We don't want a pup in a car with a beautiful leather belt. We don't want all that. We don't want a car. We don't want motorcycles. So, gold and silver we don't want. Because at that time, one of our chief ministers had kilos of gold and kilos of silver. So, it made a lot of political sense at that time to say, Sona Chandi, silver and gold we don't want. So, the idea is that we are not asking for a share of your capital, private capital. What are we asking for? So when we say we don't want, he gets angry with us and says, if you don't want this, what do you want?
क्या चाहिए फिर?
अरे हम गरीब लोग हैं,
ओह गरीब,
हम लोग मजदूरी करके जीते हैं।
फूड टू ईट।
ओह अच्छा अच्छा, खाने का मामला है।
हाँ।
मैं बताऊं आपको क्या चाहिए?
हाँ।
लंच डिनर
मैं नहीं मांगा,
ब्रेकफास्ट
मैं नहीं मांगा,
मुर्ग मसाला
मैं नहीं मांगा,
पुलियोड़ा अंडा
मैं नहीं मांगा,
अरे अंकल चिप्स
मैं नहीं मांगा,
दाल फ्राई
मैं नहीं मांगा,
पालक पनीर
मैं नहीं मांगा,
मलाई कोफ्ता
मैं नहीं
अरे
मांगा,
गरम जलेबी
मैं नहीं मांगा,
अरे उन्ना भजिया
मैं नहीं मांगा,
मर्ची बड़ा
मैं नहीं मांगा,
कोफ्तो
मैं नहीं मांगा,
अरे कचौड़ी
मैं नहीं मांगा, कचौड़ी में खाटो। Shankar and I have had a problem with this kachori mein khato because it's so Rajasthani. Anyway, kachori mein khato, main nahi manga. So the first thing he says, do you want lunch or dinner? Of course, we don't even know what it means. We said we don't want it. Do you want tandoori chicken? Which I suppose all of you have eaten in Indian restaurants. No, we don't want tandoori chicken. Then he says, boiled eggs. No, we don't want boiled eggs. Then he says, do you want the special dish we have in India, which is spinach and cheese? Do you want that? No, we don't want that. Then he goes down, falls down below, and he says, do you want these fried chilies? No, we don't want the fried chilies with besan is what? Anyway, coated with a flour. No, we don't want that. He says, what the hell do you want? But then this last line which makes him and me laugh is one line where he says, there's one fried thing, if you ever come to India, you'll see, eat it, it's called a kachori. I used to say, why do you say, leave it at that? He would say, the kachori mein khato. It's, it's a sort of an add-on, like when you have a pizza, they ask you, what kind of cheese do you want on top? So if you buy a kachori, then there's a khato on top of it. So that's why we love it. But anyway, carry on.
तो ये कुछ नहीं चाहिए क्या? फिर क्या चाहिए भाई?
We are from Rajasthan.
पानी नहीं है पीने के लिए.
ओ पानी.
Water, there's no water.
और पीने का नहीं है ना? यहाँ तो हर दुकान पे मिलता है. पेप्सी कोला.
मैं नहीं मांगा.
कैंपा कोला.
मैं नहीं मांगा.
कोका कोला.
मैं नहीं मांगा.
लिम्का सिमका.
मैं नहीं मांगा.
मैंगो फ्रूटी.
मैं नहीं मांगा.
बिस्लरी.
मैं नहीं मांगा.
बियर की बोतल.
मैं नहीं मांगा.
दारू की थैली.
मैं नहीं मांगा.
हद हो गई. अब और क्या चाहिए?
He's mentioned all of it in a scale. So we all fight against Coca-Cola in my country because it uses up water, gives us rubbish. So many of us don't drink Coke. We don't drink Pepsi. We take all these positions. So we go up the ladder, then there's beer and there's all other liquor, then pouches of liquor that India now sells in the villages to get people into the habit of alcohol. The state makes money on it. So we have all those references in our head. So of course we don't want it.
फिर क्या चाहिए?
अरे भाई हम मजदूरी खाना नहीं है खाने के लिए तो मर रहे हैं रोजी नहीं है मजदूरी नहीं है हाँ पैसे नहीं मिलते
पूरे पैसे नहीं मिलते तो रिकॉर्ड देखो ना
रिकॉर्ड कौन दिखाता है
दिखाते नहीं है रिकॉर्ड
नहीं दिखाते हैं he says well what the devil do you want if you don't want any of these things so we say to him why we want work we want wages so don't you get your wages no we don't get our wages why don't you get your wages because they never let us see the records. So we never know. They always tell us we are liars. So then.
तो अब इस गीत में अगर हम इसको वापस क्या चाहिए वो मैं बोलूँगा, आपको बोला मैं मांगा।
Now you have to say मैं मांगा, I want, because he's changing the context of his song now.
रोजी रोटी
मैं मांगा,
पूरी मजूरी
मैं मांगा,
स्कूल में पढ़ाई
मैं मांगा,
अस्पताल में दवाई
मैं मांगा,
पंचायत को खर्चो
मैं मांगा,
वो लेखो जोखो
मैं मांगा,
मस्टोड़े की नकला
मैं मांगा,
ये बिल वाउचर
मैं मांगा,
बाकी फोटो कॉपी
मैं मांगा,
सड़कों को खर्चो
मैं मांगा,
बिजली को खर्चो
मैं मांगा,
राशन को खर्चो
मैं मांगा,
ये देश को खर्चो
मैं मांगा,
खर्चा को हिसाब
मैं मांगा,
सूचना को अधिकार
मैं मांगा. So he goes, we want work, we want wages, we want
school, we want
teaching in schools.
school, we want medicines in hospitals, we want water in our taps, we want electricity, we want the accounts of all this. We want the accounts of our local government, we want the accounts of our national government, we want to see the papers, we want photocopies of the bills and vouchers, we want the records of all the accounts, we want national accounts, we want the right to information.